So now you have brain surgery. Walk me through that. That must have been a very unique, situation.
Unique and somewhat terrifying. There was part of me that really just wanted to see it as a solution, that this is just a stage I have to go through, and once we do it, things are going to go back to normal. But there was another part of me that when I stopped to think about it, stopped to realize that they were going to cut open my brain, it became way too overwhelming. And I tried to protect my headspace and not go there too often, but it was always there. It was like that homework assignment in the back of your head that until it's done, you're not going to be able to get it out of your mind. It was always there. And everything that I did, it was a thought of what's going to happen, and am I going to be okay? And so the morning we went in for brain surgery, I remember it was a Wednesday morning, and we had to be there at something ridiculous like 5 a.m, to do all of the prep and to do all the tests and to get you all ready so that the surgeon can be ready at this point in time. And I remember not wanting to go to bed the night before. And my husband finally at 12:30 at night, he said, "We got to go to sleep. Like, well, I know you don't want this day to end because it means tomorrow is going to be here, but we got to get some rest." And so finally dropped into bed, and I only slept for a couple of hours. And I remember when I got up the next morning, it was something like 4:00 in the morning. And I went into the bathroom to shower and get ready, and I was just sick, throwing up, head hanging over the toilet, with the reality of not knowing what my future was going to be hanging over me so heavily that it just physically made me so sick. And it was scary. It was very scary to face my mortality in that way and realize that whatever was going to happen that day, I had to come to terms with it. So got ready. My mother got ready and my husband got ready, and my dad was flying in from out of state. He was going to try and get to the hospital before I went under so that he could see me. And my kids were all still asleep. So I went into their rooms and I kissed each of them on the forehead. And I told them that I loved them. Tried not to wake them up. And walked out the door, got in the car, drove to the hospital. And the next couple of hours took forever. But right before they put me under anesthesia, my husband was looking out the window, waiting, hoping that my dad was going to arrive in time. And we happened to be facing the parking lot. And he saw, and he's like, "Oh, there's Vaughn. There's his car. He's here." So literally within a half an hour before I was going under, my father had arrived on a plane from Hawaii, got into Salt Lake Airport, rented a car, and was at the hospital. And we were able to all see each other and able to give my dad a hug and greet my parents and my husband and say what I hoped were not final goodbyes, but so that we could all tell each other that we loved each other. And I had them there as my strength before I went under.
Tell me a little bit about the emotion at that exact moment with everyone.
I think this is kind of what it is. I to this day can't go back to that moment without feeling it, because it was so real and so intense. And I didn't want it to be a downer. I didn't want to be sobbing and afraid. So I think we were all doing our best to stay strong and put on our best faces. But the reality is, I think it was really heavy for everyone. And when my husband leaned down and gave me a kiss and a hug, that was the last thing. And then they started to wheel me off. And I just remember thinking, you can't fall apart. So they started to wheel me away, and I just kind of turned and smiled and waved and, see you on the other side. And luckily it wasn't too much longer. The worst part about having a surgery, in my opinion, is the minutes before being put under, when it feels like the whole weight of the world is pressing down on you. And literally, I felt like I was in God's hands and the surgeon's hands, and there was nothing I could do. So I just was ready.
Yeah.
So when the neurosurgery residents came in and said, okay, it's time to get started, there was part of me that was just so relieved that we were finally going to do it. And the best feeling in the world that day was feeling that cold, weird, icy sensation of the anesthesia hitting my veins, but then also knowing I can let go of everything because now I get to go to sleep and it's all in someone else's hands.
Man, that's a powerful story right there. I think when you woke up and after everything was done and you're starting the recovery process, how did that feel? I mean, walk me through that.
You know, my husband and my family would tell you, I woke up and then I'd go back to sleep. And then I woke up and I'd go back to sleep. And that process, just coming in and out of anesthesia, takes, of course, hours and hours and hours. So what took me a long time to figure out was what had happened while I was sleeping, which was that the surgery took much longer than anticipated. They had hoped it would be, one procedure about 5 hours long. They would get all the tumor out, and then I would be able to start the healing and recovery process. The plan was for me to be in the hospital for 5 or 6 days and then be able to go home and start getting better. But what was evident pretty quickly from both the amount of time that it took and the complications that they were having was that there was a little bit more going on with my body. And the tumor was so close to the brainstems, they called it fingers, where like part of the mass had almost reached out and grabbed around the brainstem. And they could not get that. They can't get that without, doing major damage or even killing you. And so it did take quite a bit longer. And in the process of removing the tumor, there were several side effects and complications that occurred. So by the time I really woke up and really was coming out of anesthesia, my family had been on pins and needles for hours and hours and hours. And it was late at night by the time I really started to come out of it. And I quickly started to realize that there were some other things going on, but I didn't realize then that it wasn't just anesthesia and normal brain tumor stuff. I didn't know what the process of recovery looked like, and I certainly didn't know what the side effects and complications looked like. When I finally started really coming to and the doctor started telling me what was going on, then I came to realize that they had already confided in my family, but that I had facial paralysis on my right side. And so those nerves, in the process of cutting through to remove the tumor, my nerves were damaged. And so the whole right side of my face was paralyzed and was not working. And at the time, it hit me because I was having a hard time keeping food in my mouth, and they would try and come and feed me and give me things, and I couldn't manage it. And I still thought it was from the anesthesia. I thought, well, I'm not out of it yet. I'm still loopy. I'm still in and out of anesthesia. But I also realized I couldn't close my eye. My eye was big and wide open, and I didn't have any moisture in my eye. And just one by one, these little things started happening, and we came to find out that the whole right side of my face was paralyzed. I had lost most of the hearing in my right ear. And what took us another day or two to realize was that I also had spinal fluid that was leaking out of my nose and down the back of my throat, which means that somewhere in the course of doing the brain surgery, they were able to sew everything up and put it back together, but somewhere there was a hole in my brain that spinal fluid was leaking out of. And that is a terrible side effect and can be a fatal complication. And so the whole next journey of the hospital stay ended up being focused on trying to fix and help all of the complications and side effects that took place. So while we had planned for one craniotomy and 5 days in the hospital, I ended up having 3 craniotomies during that time and spent 35 days in and out of Neuro Critical Care as we tried to put me back together. And still, much of it was a process of trying to save my life.
Man, 35 days. That's a long time. I mean, how did what the timetable feel like when you're in there? Did it feel like you were there forever? Did it go by quickly?
It felt like forever, partly because I was navigating a whole new space My body was completely different. I felt very out of control. I felt like the inner parts of who I was were gone. My body didn't respond the way I wanted it to. None of my ability to function. I couldn't even sit up on my own. I couldn't bathe myself. I couldn't walk. I couldn't chew. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't hold food in my mouth. I just couldn't do any of the things. And so it felt like a very long time trying to figure these things out. And it was very much one itty bitty baby step at a time. And as much as we tried to give my body time to recover and hope that we wouldn't have to do additional surgeries and that these complications would fix themselves, which sometimes they do, because the human body is amazing. Sometimes they will correct themselves on their own. One day at a time, it became evident that it was going to require additional intervention to make some of these happen. So a couple of weeks in, probably 3 weeks into the hospital stay, I started getting much, much worse. And the doctors had given my body all the time. We'd done additional tests. We'd tried to figure everything out. And it became evident that we needed to do surgery. But I got very, very sick. And in getting sick, they realized I had an additional complication. And it was actually potentially one of the most fatal. I had a complication that's called pneumocephalus, which means air on the brain. So wherever the hole in my brain was that was allowing spinal fluid to leak out, that same space was also allowing additional air and gas to leak in. And so there was a massive problem with pressure and with extra air that was on my brain. And I can tell you from my side, it felt like my head was being crushed with a vice from the inside of my skull. And it was intensely painful, and I truly believed it was going to mean the end of my mortal life. I didn't believe that any body could continue having all of that happen and be able to come out of it. And I had to get to a point where I almost had to check out and leave the scenario with my family, with my mom was there and my husband was there. But in my mind, I couldn't be there anymore. My body was telling me it was time to move on, and I had to allow that to happen if that was what was going to happen. And that was a pretty intense and difficult moment.
Do you think that helped you?
I think that it helped me in the sense that it felt like I finally turned over my will and what my expectations were. Because I'd always had plans. I'm a planner. I'm a get-her-done girl. I'm a little bit of a control freak. And it was when I finally truly let go. And when I finally let go of doing it my way, I believe that's when the Lord was really able to step in and say, okay, now that you've let go, now let me intervene and I can help bridge that gap. The things that you couldn't do and your body couldn't do on its own, and even that these doctors couldn't do, I can help do. And now that you finally let go of the wheel yourself, that was able to happen. So from that point in time on, things actually happened very, very quickly. A doctor who had never cared for me before happened to be on shift, came in, discovered that I had the pneumocephalus. We were able, once we knew what was wrong, we were able to treat it relatively quickly. And as soon as I started to get even a little bit better, probably within 12 hours, then they did a second surgery. And then once we realized that one didn't solve all of the problems yet either, then within a few days, we did an additional surgery. So part of it, when you ask, what happened and did it help, or how was it when I let go? A big part of it was just finally saying, okay, I'm going to be at peace with whatever happens, even though in that moment I believed that meant I wasn't, that it was over, that I was going to let go and I was going to leave this world. But realizing that would be okay too, and feeling at peace with that was a big step in the overall healing. Yeah. It didn't solve anything in the moment, and I didn't have, things didn't fix themselves immediately, but it did start to help me have the understanding as well as the strength to say, okay, I do want to do what isn't in my control.
Yep.
I realize I'm not going to have control over things, but those things I do have control of, I'm going to do my best. So I started advocating for myself a little bit more. I started working harder on my physical therapy and doing all of the little exercises that they gave me to really do everything that I could. I realized God was doing his part, but I had to do my part too. I had to show up and do my end of making the miracles happen, and putting myself in the best position possible. Because the opportunities for miracles are often there, but you have to do your part to make them happen. And I'm a firm believer in that. And so once all of those things came into alignment, then I started getting better and started getting better. Doesn't mean everything went away, but we started learning how to deal with it. And I was able to be released from the hospital and go home to my little family, and still had many, many complications and surgeries and things that were coming. But it was a huge step in restoring that peace, that family unit, and putting a little bit of my life back to some sort of normalcy.
Got it. You know, it's funny. This is almost you just reminded me of something. So I had a near-death experience when I was 15. And I asked you that question, did it help that you surrendered, basically? Because in the middle of the night, I stopped breathing. And it was the second time that this happened. And no air was coming through, barely. And I remember looking in the mirror, and I firmly believe this. If I accepted death, and that's when I started to breathe. And it was like a life change. I still remember looking in the mirror and being like, this is it. All right, I'm good. And then all of a sudden, I could breathe. And it's almost like that, you're fighting it.
I think that that's exactly right. When I finally got to the point where I was okay with my life coming to an end, I actually remember exhaling and feeling at peace, being completely at peace, knowing this was going to be it. And once that feeling of peace overwhelmed me, then all of a sudden things started kicking into gear and my mind went to a totally different place. And then my body started to fight again. Once I had accepted the fact that it was going to be over. And so there was something very powerful about that moment of surrender and about having peace in it, because I felt very warm in that moment, almost as though someone were there reaching out and giving me a hug, like the warmth of an embrace when you see someone and you feel someone else's presence and you feel totally wrapped in love or in care and peace. And I got to that point, and then it felt like it lasted for a while, and then at the same time it felt like it was an instant. And as soon as that instant was over, then everything came rushing back, and all of the pain and all of the outside noises and everything that was going on in the real world kicked back in. And all of a sudden then I had the will, and my body seemed to have the strength to keep fighting.
Yeah, that's a very, it's that specific time where you do surrender. There is a unique feeling about it. Like there's something, it's hard to kind of pinpoint, but it's almost one of the most peaceful things you can ever, I think, experience, because you just don't feel that, especially if you're, as you refer to yourself as a get-her-done kind of girl. You're typically on the move. To just release is not natural when you have a personality like that. And I have the same personality. And it's just, what do you think that is? That when you surrender, there's a specific feeling that happens. What do you think that is?
As a person of great faith and as a Christian, I would say that's God. That's the Holy Spirit stepping in and helping you feel that peace. That's what I would say. Other people might use other terms. Some people might say, oh, that's, the universe. That's you being at one with the universe. That's you finding your place and taking your place in the universe and accepting that. I would definitely say that that's God. That is my creator who loves me dearly. That was him giving me that peace and being able to accept that moment. And the wonderful thing was, not only did I not die, but I now have an incredible amount of peace about what that process looks like for the future.
Yeah.
I am not afraid of dying, of death, of what's going to happen to me afterwards, because I know that when those moments come, that I can have that great peace, and that I can have that warmth, and can have that acceptance. And something about having that acceptance, when you finally come to understand what you have control of and what you don't, and being able to be okay with that and let it all go. And I think the exhaling aspect of it was very important in my case, because they always talk about the importance of your breathing.
Yes.
And, being intentional with breathing in and breathing out and what that does for your body. And in my case, I really felt like the exhaling, like, this is me letting go. This is me turning it all over. And when I did, God took the wheel. And that was a powerful, powerful thing. And then when he totally took over, not that he hadn't been there, he had always been there, but I finally allowed myself, I stopped fighting and took my own hands off and said, okay, it's not me. It's not my will. It's thy will. And then I accepted it. And that's when, things really started to change and happen. So maybe that acceptance and understanding and willingness to know that something bigger, something outside of us, something bigger, something greater, something grander is really at work. When we let that grander God take over, there's power in that moment, and there's power in that acceptance.
So tell me a little bit about your new normal and how things have changed now that you've gone through this, situation of getting surgery and now you're home.
New normal. Wow, that's something that I did not want coming out of the hospital. All I wanted was to go back to the old normal. That was my whole goal. And trying to survive and to get through all of it was to go back to the old normal. But it became evident pretty quickly that old normal was gone. And I have to admit, there was a little bit of mourning and feelings of loss that came along with that. That my old life, the first 33 years of who I was, that period of time was over, and that door had closed. And I was in a unique place where that door closed, but I still had to be willing to open the next door. And for a while, I think I was stuck kind of in between doors in that little area, where you have all these doors around you, but until you pick which one you're going to go through, you're just stuck. And that feeling of being stuck is not fun. And so the one door had closed, but I had to decide to open the next door. And new normal was nothing like what I would have expected. When I was in the hospital, the doctors had looked at my nerves and the paralysis in my face, and originally had said, hopefully that will recover quickly, and hopefully that the nerves were just damaged a little bit and they just need a little bit of time to recover. And as the days turned into weeks, turned into months, and then turned into years, it became, okay, that's probably not going to get any better. This is your new normal. Or you need to learn to accept this, be grateful that you're alive, and accept the progress that you've made, but be okay with the things that you don't have anymore. And at the time, people were like, oh, how did you deal with that? But, at the time, I didn't think I was dealing with anything but a temporary situation. I believed it was going to be temporary. I believed it was going to be over and that I would go back to the old normal. And so day at a time, I actually started living the new normal without realizing that that's what I was doing. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you accept it? Like, I know this is something that when people have a new normal, we almost always fear that new normal. How did you accept it?
Well, I think in the beginning, I didn't look at it as a new normal. I still looked at it as trying to just get back to me, trying to get back as much as I could to the old life. But in the process, I was also restoring some of the things that I had temporarily lost, some things that I had to temporarily let go of because I was so compromised. And that was good. It was good to be able to restore that faith in myself, that courage, And I actually started putting things back on the calendar. The calendar had been cleared for months because of surgery and recovery, and anything I had was just completely wiped out. And the thing that I found was actually good for me to do was to put things back on the calendar and to start saying, Jodi's going to show up again on this day. And no matter what else it took, what else was going on behind the scenes, if that meant I had to reserve all of my energy for that day, I knew that on that day, Jodi needed to show up.
I'm curious, what was the first thing you put on your calendar?
The first thing I put on my calendar was actually a big thing. And it was, I was going back to work. I had the company I worked for was very, very kind, and they held my job open for months and just held it for me till I could come back. And I had given them full permission. I said, I have no idea what's going to happen. You can replace me. You can move on if you want. And they held it and instead supported me through my whole journey and said, we will hold your job. And if you want to come back, we want to be able to give you that opportunity. And at the time, I was the director of a community nonprofit organization. And the organizational leaders had said, we're going to hold this and we're going to let you come back. And so I had this date on the calendar, and it was in early September after my kids were going to be in school. So I knew that they would be taken care of and that their needs were going to be covered, and I could focus on taking care of some of my needs and some of the other things. And so the first thing on the calendar was, I'm going to walk back into work, and I had been scheduled to give a big presentation. What a way to welcome yourself back is to take this brand new situation and this brand new person, and in my case, this brand new face and this new phase of life, and to stand in front of 400 people and not only admit who I was, but own who I was and embrace it. And in part of that experience, what I was doing was setting the stage to have a fundraising campaign. And I was talking to people about, their willingness to give and to be on the giving side of life. And you're on the giving side of life because you're here at work and you're watching this presentation, or you're at home and you're watching this video, but you're in this good place. And you never know when that can switch and when you'll go from being on the giving side to the receiving side. And I was able in a very personal way to say, that's what happened to me, as I went from being the one running the charity and raising the money to being the one in the bed as the recipient of people's acts of kindness and the recipient of the charity. And that changed my whole perspective on things. And so I think now in hindsight, I could see that it was a very powerful first day to show up, because I was telling this story in a way that would become my new normal. It was accepting what I had gone through and also giving people the chance to embrace me as I am now. And I had no idea how powerful that moment would be for me, but the conscious decision to have Jodi show up one day at a time, starting at that day, that was the start of my new normal. That was the start of my second chance of life. And even though I was trying so hard to make it look like my first life, now I realize really that was the start of my second life, my new normal.
And what would you say? I would make the assumption that your second, your new normal, your second life has a greater impact than even the first one. Do you view it that way?
I don't think I viewed it that way in the beginning, because in the beginning, I think I felt still somewhat weakened by what I had gone through. Like physically, my body was so weak. I knew that mentally I was stronger, but I was also aware of my own frailties so much more. I started overthinking things and having some anxieties because I thought, my gosh, now I realize if I fall, I will get hurt. If I crash in my car, I could end up back in the ICU. And my mind started going into all of these crazy places. So I would say in the beginning, I did not recognize that. But starting that very first day when I showed up at work and gave that presentation, the response was immediate and it was powerful. And people said, wow, because of your story, because of what you shared. In that case, it was, I'm going to give to this fund. I'm going to be on the giving side. I'm going to donate money. Or they said, can you tell me more? Can you tell me what you did to get through so I can have hope in the situation that I'm going through? And there was actually a gentleman who was there on site, and I saw him out of the corner of my eye. And I connected with him immediately because I looked at him and realized he had something wrong with him. I could see it. He had something wrong with his eye, just like I had something wrong with my eye. So we saw each other and had like a little soul connection as soon as we had that little exchange. And afterwards, I was able to go up and talk to him and find out that he had been in an accident, and he lost, his eye was essentially dead. It was gone. It was shriveled and it was shrunken, and he had no vision. But the eyeball itself was still there, and he had a ton of damage. He had a lot of pain, and he had lost his sight. Immediately, even though our situations were different, we connected on a very personal and profound level. And we exchanged stories and compassion, and somehow we lifted each other up and buoyed each other up, even though our situations were totally different. So when I started having those experiences, it clued me into the fact that this new normal, even though some aspects of me were compromised and were weaker, that made other areas of me stronger, made my heart bigger, made my eyes more open to look for people who maybe needed help, who needed that strength, who needed that buoying, who needed hope. So while part of me felt weakened, definitely the bigger part of me felt emboldened and empowered.